Alright, hello there everybody. Welcome to kind of an impromptu, little unrelated video in the channel here. This is going to be a quick little ranking my opinions on the Star Wars movies. I'm mainly doing this because James asked me to, James the Douglas. He just thought it'd be interesting to see my kind of opinions, my ranking of these Star Wars movies. I'm a pretty big fan of all Star Wars, so I'm a little biased here. There's pretty much not a single movie here that I hate. So maybe it's kind of a unique thing being a Star Wars fan and not hating anything. Like I probably wouldn't put anything in F tier. So it's probably good that there's not an F tier even here. So this is, probably a decent tier list to start. I have seen all these movies pretty recently, actually, meaning within the last 4 months. I did a marathon before Episode 9 came out. I'm gonna start with the prequel trilogy. That's what I grew up with. Those are the movies that were coming out when I was a kid. I liked the Phantom Menace. I'm not gonna lie. I'd probably put it in A. Yeah, no, I put it in B. Definitely B out of all the others. It's kind of mid-tier. It's pretty fun. I enjoyed it. There's not a lot to hate about this movie, I think. Sure, Jar Jar's, kind of a kid's thing, but I don't hate it, Overall, I thought it was a really solid movie. The actions are great. Action scenes are great. Yada, yada, yada. Episode 2 is probably my least favorite movie in Star Wars. Not that I hate it, but the love story between Anakin and Padme is just not done very well. Dialogue's not super great. I know I'm gonna get a lot of hate for saying that. I don't think the acting was very great. Be like, hey, well, with the bad dialogue, you can't really act it, make that good. Well, you kind of can, but whatever. I probably couldn't, so I'm not gonna really put the blame on the actors for that one. More so on the dialogue and the editing of it. Pretty much the only redeeming factor of this movie is Obi-Wan Kenobi. Revenge of the Sith, decent movie. I didn't like it as much as Phantom Menace though. Rewatching it, I know this is real controversial because it's widely considered the best of the prequels, and this is a lot of where my bias comes in because I grew up with Star Wars mostly as a Clone Wars series, so this being the closest movie that ties in with the Clone Wars, it just doesn't feel right. The Anakin doesn't feel like the right Anakin, I'm used to the Matt Lanter portrayal. It also has some of the same problems as Attack of the Clones with Anakin and Padme. The love story not quite making sense. Overall, I think it's fine. The Order 66 stuff is obviously very sad. The final battle with Anakin and Obi-Wan is sad, but I do think it drags on way too long. And overall, I didn't really enjoy myself watching this movie. Rewatching this movie, anyway. So at the moment, I consider Phantom Menace the best, Revenge of the Sith the second best, and Attack of the Clones the worst of the prequels. Another disclaimer, not that I hate any of them. I like all of them. Next chronologically is Solo, and honestly, I loved Solo. It's definitely one of my favorite Star Wars movies. It was a lot of fun, obviously unnecessary, I get it, but it was awesome, and I wasn't expecting to like it going into it. I was really skeptical about the actor for Han Solo, Alden Ehrenreich, I think. I might have mispronounced that. I was really skeptical of him, but he kind of proved himself to me, I think. The first scene we see him in, he's like acting scared, and it's not really an emotion we see Han Solo have before, so it kind of sold it immediately for me. And of course, more bias comes in here when I say Darth Maul had a big impact in how I appreciated this movie and its connections to the Clone Wars. Next up is Rogue One. Decent movie. It's the only Star Wars movie that I've ever been bored with watching it in theaters. First time I watched it, I got really bored about midway through when they were saving her father, Galen or so, on the rainy planet. Watching it back on Netflix, I've watched it twice now. I haven't really lost interest. It's been pretty interesting. I'd put it on par with the Phantom Menace in terms of how much I enjoyed it. This is kind of a weird mix because a lot of people consider this their worst and this their best. So it's, I put them on as both kind of mid-tier Star Wars for me. Obviously, I love both these movies. I love all these movies. Okay, I've said that plenty of times. You get the point by now. Next up is the original trilogy. A New Hope, I'd probably put on the same level as Phantom Menace and Rogue One. It's the OG. Obviously not what I grew up with. I can understand the nostalgia for it. It's pretty fun. But the graphics are a little outdated. The lightsaber fight, a little outdated. And the transition from escaping the Death Star to attacking the Death Star is pretty sudden. You don't get any, in between. So that's kind of a downside of the movie. Not that it's bad in any way, but I really that's probably why it's not A. And then we have Empire Strikes Back. I'd probably put this in S tier as well. Easily my favorite of the original trilogy. I mean, what can you say? Empire is widely considered the best Star Wars movie by a lot of people. I'd probably put it above Solo actually, if I can fix that up. There we go. But I definitely say these are two of my definite favorites. Yeah, what can I really say? Empire's pretty fantastic. The lightsaber fight's great. The reveal of the father thing was also awesome. That's actually, even though I grew up with the prequels, that's how I learned that Anakin was Luke's father. You know, so even I had that, even though I was a younger generation. Then we have Return of the Jedi. Honestly, I put it in A tier. A lot of people would disagree and say that's the worst of the original trilogy. Not that it's bad, but that it's the worst of the three. I really like the Tatooine stuff. All of that's pretty fantastic in my opinion. The Jabba the Hutt scenes, all that, and of course the ultimate redemption of Darth Vader is nice. I wouldn't put it in S tier simply because of bias and the fact that I know about the past of it all. I don't really think Vader was redeemable, but I mean he kind of was for the story, so it's there. I wish I could have watched that one without the special editions, the same with A New Hope, actually. I wish I could have seen the original versions of that, but I've only ever seen special editions with all the changes. But now we're on to the controversial 3, the sequel trilogy, that seems to get a lot of flack. Starting with The Force Awakens, I really liked this when it came out. I put it in A tier, honestly. It's a pretty fun movie. I liked all the characters they introduced. I liked Finn, I liked Rey. Kylo Ren was to me, but you know, he eventually grows on me in, you know, other movies. And I'm not gonna pretend like the other movies don't impact my decision on other movies, you know? Like I wouldn't like Solo as much if I didn't like Han Solo in Empire Strikes Back, A New Hope, and Return of the Jedi. What else can I really say about The Force Awakens? The Han Solo scene was really emotional. Unfortunately, that was spoiled for me when I went to see the movie. I did kind of know that it was gonna happen, but you know, it still had some weight. Now, The Last Jedi is kind of the most controversial movie of the entire Star Wars saga here. But where would I rank it? A fan who actually enjoyed the movie, where would I rank it? I put it in B tier. On par with these three movies, in terms of how much I enjoyed it. I thought the Luke Skywalker stuff in this movie was great. I feel like kind of a chump for liking this movie, but you know, I do. I like how Luke ended up. I like that he gave into his failure. Obviously, the scene with Yoda and Luke is just phenomenal. Probably my favorite scene in the sequel trilogy on its own. Pretty much any scene with Luke in this movie is pretty fantastic. The Rose and Finn stuff on Canto Bight, I don't hate. Obviously, it's not the best. It's pretty controversial. I don't hate it though. I understand that sometimes missions in Star Wars fail, and that was no exception for this case, and that ended up getting the Resistance killed. I don't think that was a negative on the movie. I think that was a negative on the character of Poe for sending Finn and Rose to do that, and not trusting Holdo, and ultimately putting the Resistance in a pretty bad place. I think the fight on Crate with Luke and Kylo Ren was probably my favorite lightsaber fight of the trilogy. I don't know if that counts, actually, as a lightsaber fight. I'm gonna pretend it does, because even though the lightsabers don't come in contact, it's two force fielders going at it, you know? Okay, now Rise of Skywalker is obviously the newest movie, the one freshest in my mind. I really liked it. I put it in A tier. I liked it more than Force Awakens, not so much as Return of the Jedi. James has pointed out to me a lot about when we discuss the Star Wars movies, that there's a lot of back and forth. Oh, he died. No, he didn't. Nope, this character died. But oh, actually, he didn't. In this movie, with the likes of Chewbacca, C-3PO. It happens with Kylo Ren. It happens with Rey. You know, most characters. I didn't mind it as much. I kind of just saw it as a kind of a story choice, kind of like a story in threes kind of way. Could it have been executed better? Probably. Now, don't get me wrong here. I enjoyed The Rise of Skywalker, but I've seen the concept art and listened to the scripts and stuff for the Duel of the Fates, the script for this that would have been probably a better sequel to The Last Jedi, and definitely better than The Rise of Skywalker. I would have loved to see that version of the movie, but I mean, we're not going to get it. And I don't blame anyone in particular for that, except Star Wars fans who gave this one an F- tier. So, well, that and the fact that Carrie Fisher passed away unfortunately, in late 2016. And she was pretty prominent in the original script for this movie. On that note, actually, I think the biggest scene in this Rise of Skywalker is probably where Han Solo comes back to save Ben Solo and bring him back to the light. And that's through Leia, basically giving him a reminder through the Force, or whatever. I think originally in the script, that would have been Leia. Leia would have been the one in Han Solo's shoes in that moment, and that could have been probably more touching as Leia, as a mother-son kind of thing, kind of mirroring the son leaving his mother in the Phantom Menace into the son returning to his mother in Rise of Skywalker. Unfortunately, it just couldn't happen that way, but I kind of see it that way in my head. Rey being a Palpatine, I could take it or leave it, but I'm gonna take it, and so I don't hate it, I don't love it, but it happened. And I think the big scene in the movie with all the Jedi voices of the past is probably one of the most emotional moments of the entire saga. Pretty big for me. I know a lot of people wanted the Force Ghosts. I don't think it would have made as much practical sense as everyone thinks. I don't think it could have worked, simply because they'd have had to cast, like, everybody. Because if you think about it, you'd have Ewan McGregor would have to be Alec Guinness because of just how we've seen them, or you'd be changing the canon into they can just be young whenever they want. You'd have to cast Ahsoka and Kanan from the animated shows, which could be more of a hassle than you might think, because, maybe one day they'll want to do live action stuff with those characters, and now they've tied themselves down to an actor. Not to mention all the other voices they used. I think Ayla Secura was one of them. Characters like that just wouldn't have made sense as a Force Ghost, because they never went through the trials that Yoda did in the Clone Wars series to become a Force Ghost. Same thing with Mace Windu, with Qui-Gon Jinn, who never actually completed the training, so couldn't appear visually, unless he was on the planet Mortis, which is heavily influenced by the Force. Anyway, I'm a nerd. There's a lot of hate for these three movies in particular that I don't completely agree with, but I understand some dislike for them. However, I like them more than the prequel trilogy. And that is how I think of Star Wars. Those are my opinions on the, I guess, 11 Star Wars movies. If I had to rank the TV shows, Clone Wars and Rebels would be in S tier for sure, and Resistance would be in D tier. So for Resistance, it's just not my target audience. Well, that's gonna do it for me. Thank you everyone for watching and paying attention to my bad opinions on Star Wars. I will see you later. See ya.